Good morning, Garanga. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I'm doing well. How are you? Good evening, I should say, on a Friday night. Garanga. Okay, good. Well, welcome everybody to another edition of our office hours, or my office hours. I'm Malcolm Hawker. I'm the head of data strategy with Profisee software. We'll wait for more people to join. So, Garanga, I hope you don't mind waiting just a little bit. We'll see if a few more people trickle in here. Okay. I'm seeing you in the chat, so it's all good. But we'll give it a few more minutes here. See if other people join. News of the world. So it's currently September 9th, the morning of Friday, September 9th here in Florida, USA. Yesterday night, a little bit of sad news, passing of Queen Elizabeth II. I actually made a post on LinkedIn about that. Yeah, Haley, our coordinator, wonderful. Providing a little bit of context in how to ask questions. But Garanga, you could just ask through the Q&A if you'd like, or you could jump on the stage if you'd like as well. Anyway, I was mentioning passing last night of Queen Elizabeth II, which for a lot of countries I know is not really big news, particularly here in the U.S. I mean, it's big news because she was a world leader, but here in the U.S., the Queen doesn't play that big of a role. But certainly, having been born and raised in a Commonwealth country, I know that the Queen is much more a kind of a present force, and the royal family in general is more of a present force. So I don't know how big the Queen was in India as a former colony. Certainly in Canada, the Queen was a relatively big presence. I mean, just growing up, her picture was on the dollar bill, and her image was everywhere. The royal family would even go so far as like endorsing products. So you're in the shower in the morning and you have a shower bottle that was actually had a royal symbol on it, which a little bit of an odd business, I guess you could say, for the royal family to be like endorsing products, but they did. A really normal thing. So my point being is that for me, at the very least, growing up in Canada, you couldn't go a day without seeing something related to the Queen, which I found interesting, particularly now as I live in the U.S. So that news last night was pretty big. Why don't we dive into it, Garanga? Since you're the first here, and we can address your question, and you get 100% of my time. What is it that you would like to ask today? And if you want to jump on the stage, you certainly can. We can have you be on video, or you could just ask via chat as well. Okay, chat's fine. Chat works for me as well. And if you keep coming to these events, Garanga, I'm excited to have you here. But boy, you're going to know everything that I know at a certain point. So maybe we'll see you out in the speaking circuit one of these days or years. I think it'd be fantastic. If you keep asking all the right questions, you'll be a great MDM consultant. So for anybody that is just joining, perhaps on the recorded version of this through YouTube, this is a Q&A where people are asking a lot of questions via chat functionality. So if there are moments where I'm not saying anything, and you're just seeing me stare at the screen, that's why I'm waiting for questions to come in through chat or through in person. So also in related news, here in early September, I recently returned from the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit. We can talk about that a bit. Garanga's got a question. What is the future of MDM as AI and ML RPA is growing dramatically? What a good question. MDM's not going away. The future of MDM as a discipline looks very, very bright. I was actually quoted as saying that in a recent interview I was given. And the reason why the future of MDM here is very, very bright is because it has to be. There's more data than there ever has been before. And I know we keep saying that every year. We keep saying there's more data than there ever has been, but that's true. And if you are trying to digitally transform, if you are trying to revolutionize your customer experiences, if you're trying to optimize your supply chain, if you are trying to collect and analyze product-related feedback from your customers, all of these things require having competencies around master data. All of these things require you to have solid management and governance practices related to customer and product and asset and location and on and on, all those kind of core domains that are relevant for MDM. So the future of MDM is very, very bright. We've been saying now for at least 10 years, well, MDM is kind of going away because we'll implement big data solutions and then we won't need MDM anymore. Or we will implement Salesforce and we really won't need MDM anymore. Or we'll implement new AI and ML and we won't need MDM anymore. I would challenge that notion. So really, the way I look at AI and ML is really all about, and I recognize these are two different things, by the way, artificial intelligence and machine learning. I recognize these are two different things, but I will loosely clump them together when talking about what Gartner would call augmented data management practices. And notice that the word here is augmented. It's not automated. Yes, AI and ML will add some layers of automation into data management. We can talk about that a little bit more. The real sweet spot here, I think, is augmentation, meaning having things go bigger, faster, stronger. The real story of AI and ML is about scale, right? It's about adding technologies to allow you to scale your data and analytics program, your governance program, your MDM program. Now, if you try to start with AI and ML, I'm seeing this, and I saw this with a lot of clients that I spoke to in the past at Gartner. If you start with AI and ML without a foundation of solid data governance, solid MDM, having some MDM software, having well-defined business processes, having some governance policies defined and managed, having a governance committee in place. If you don't have that foundation and you just say, oh, okay, I'm going to go buy some AI and ML, you're not going to solve any problems. Arguably, you're going to make things a lot worse, right? And I've seen this before where companies go and buy very, very expensive things to enable AI and ML, to automate data management processes, to streamline data management processes, to maybe even automate MDM. When they go buy that shiny thing, if they try to implement that shiny thing and they haven't built a foundation of governance, of MDM as a discipline, you're not going to get a lot of value out of that bright, shiny thing. However, there's a ton of promise for AI and ML. Just a few use cases that jump out. One, of course, is modeling of data, right? Where you could use AI related processes to help augment and to some degree potentially automate things like data modeling. That includes the modeling of hierarchies, where perhaps you could even use things like knowledge graphs, graph-related technology to understand relationships and complex relationships that exist in data that you couldn't have done before. So from a data modeling perspective, data definitions, even I think that AI could help play a role there and could help augment, not fully automate, but augment some of the decisions that are made in the data modeling sphere. That's one use case, just kind of data modeling. Another use case would be data profiling, data collection, data cataloging. And I realize this isn't a direct kind of one-to-one with MDM. We typically separate master data management from what we would call metadata management. And metadata management kind of more closely aligns to the notion of profiling and data discovery and data cataloging. But that's certainly an area that improvements there in the use of AI and ML in the data profiling and discovery and metadata management space could make MDM a lot better. So we certainly see more use cases of using AI to go discover data. And is data point one very similar to data point two? Cataloging of data, even assigning kind of, automating metadata management discovery and the cataloging of that data. So that's a great use case. There are use cases here certainly around stewardship for AI and ML, where you could use machine learning to train models, right? So there are three forms of machine learning. Where one of those forms is where you could have use human training to train trained ML. Where the decisions that are being made by data stewards within a UI could be used to improve data stewardship process and maybe even augment and maybe even automate some of them. One use case here would be in entity resolution, matching, right? So if you say, okay, entity one and entity two are actually the same because they share attributes or they share certain things, and maybe your algorithm couldn't figure that out on its own, where a data steward is saying these things match, where that insight could be fed back into future match decisions where that wouldn't go into a work queue for a data steward to manually match. So there's a lot of promise from AI and ML perspective. Honestly, most of the vendors are providing only really basic functionality here. So be very, very careful when you're talking to vendors about AI and ML. It's a lot of marketing right now. There's not a lot of MDM vendors that are heavily reliant on it because it's still so early, right? It is still so early, and ultimately, a lot of these processes, there is a need for human involvement. So the future of MDM certainly involves AI and ML and other ways to augment data management processes. I gave kind of 4 examples of some use cases there. So I think we could expect to see that growing more and more and more. But the advice that I would give is don't get too far ahead of yourself from the perspective of establishing a data governance program, establishing some basic MDM related processes before going and buying something that's very expensive that may not drive a ton of value. That's the long answer to that relatively short question. And Garanga, you gave me a thumbs up. That's awesome. The stage is still yours, Garanga, if you want it. I don't see anybody else in the chat yet. Are there others online? Haley, do you see anybody else? I do not. It's your lucky Friday. It is your lucky Friday. Well, we had several people register, but it is an hour long. And it's an open door. So if people come in at, 45 minutes past the hour, that's just fine. Okay, Nandita's on the line as well. Wonderful. Thanks, Haley. So while I'm here, instead of just looking at me, one thing I can share is, in related news, I did attend the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit, which was really cool. And I published a blog that kind of summarized some of my experiences. I think that's a good thing to talk about here if we would, since we have time to talk about it. If I can make sharing work. So this is a blog post that recently was published on Profisee.com. Garanga, you read it. Well, so what you're going to hear here may be repetitive, but we are recording this session and we are posting these sessions to YouTube as well. So rather than just sit and stare at me and wait for more people to join, I thought it would be useful to share some of the insights here. But thank you for reading that, Garanga. That's fantastic. These are some of the key takeaways from my attendance at the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit. So for those of you that don't know, I mean, obviously Gartner is a large company that provides a lot of insights and has a lot of analysts and people like me who provide best practices and insights and industry trends. They publish a lot of research in the space, including this thing called the Magic Quadrant. I was the co-author of the last 3 Magic Quadrants for MDM software, and they hold these summits every year. They're really, really great, but they took a 3-year break because of COVID. So this is the first summit for Gartner that they've had since 2019, and it was recently in Orlando. And some of the things that I saw at the summit, I thought the best way to kind of encapsulate things is to just kind of put things into 3 buckets, right? Things that are really kind of cool and interesting and evolving trends, but may not necessarily be ready for everybody to kind of dive into yet, right? So proceed with caution was my was what I what I recommended. The second kind of bucket of things is things you really need to be focusing on right now. Absolutely, you need to be focusing on it. If you're not, you're probably behind the curve. And then number three was you probably should have already been focusing on these things. And if you're just talking about that third category of things, you're probably a little bit behind. So in terms of category one, not ready yet for prime time, certainly the thing that really jumps out to me is data fabric. Now, there's a lot of news online. There's a lot of things on LinkedIn about the data fabric. I was a contributor to the data fabric narrative at Gartner. I was actively engaged in data fabric related research, data fabric related analyst communities at Gartner. So this is something that is near and dear to me. And I'm a believer in the data fabric. I'm absolutely a believer in the data fabric. I think it stands when implemented fully. And when implemented to the degree that Gartner defines a data fabric, I think it stands to potentially revolutionize data management. And I don't say that lightly. I think if you implement a data fabric the way that Gartner defines a data fabric, I think it could absolutely be transformational. But the problem here is that we're many, many, many years away from prime time on the data fabric. And the real break here between where we are and where we probably need to be from a data fabric perspective is really all about automation. And I talked about this in the previous question, right? And the whole vision of the data fabric. If I were at a dinner party, or if I was talking to somebody at a pub and somebody asked me, what's the one thing that makes the data fabric different than anything else, including the data mesh, by the way, including any other architecture that came before it. The one thing that differentiates data fabric, I would say at a very, very high level, is that a data fabric is reliant on infrastructure that allows data to classify its own use and its own governance. That's the difference, right? Meaning it's the data is classifying itself. The data is classifying the rules for how to use it. So instead of humans defining the data models and humans defining the governance patterns, humans defining the integration patterns, and integration is a part of this, humans defining the data quality rules, when is something correct, when is something incorrect. Instead of humans doing those things, which is where we are largely today, I would argue we're 95% humans defining those things. The data fabric says is that the data can do that itself. The data can inform its usage. The data can inform its classification. The data can inform its governance. And when taken to an extreme, could even, in theory, down the road, much of that could be automated. So that's the vision of the data fabric, is where you are able to use metadata and what Gartner would call active metadata. We can talk about that a little bit more, but where metadata is used to understand when data is accurate or when data is inaccurate, or when data is fulfilling a use case or not fulfilling a use case, or when data is defines a relationship or where it's involved in a relationship, and on and on and on, right? But let's take a data quality use case. In theory, you could use a lot of metadata to determine the accuracy of data based on things like, is a transaction successful or not successful, right? A very, very basic use case where it's, did the transaction proceed, right? Was the piece of mail delivered to the correct address? What did the credit card process correctly, right? If yes, then that means the data was accurate, or at the very least, it was fit for that purpose, right? So this is going to be break the data fabric down. What you will find are all of these kind of if-then conditions that are sitting in data, that are sitting within metadata, that you could aggregate those and analyze those to say, aha, here's what correct data looks like from the perspective of a successful billing transaction, right? Or here's what correct data looks like through the lens of a shipping experience. Maybe you're shipping goods out to somebody or just sending somebody a piece of mail, right? So you would know an address was accurate because the mail was successfully delivered. So if you look at that kind of writ large across all of your data, in theory, with the right levels of AI and ML, with the right levels of what Gartner calls active metadata, and what they mean by that is where the metadata is actually being used to make data governance decisions, right? Not humans, AI, ML, data itself. if you're using all those things, if you have enough of that data, enough of those insights, that in theory, in time, the data could start to manage itself. That's really the promise of data fabric down the road. And we are a long way from that. There are a lot of vendors selling data fabrics and say, hey, buy my fabric. And what they're really selling is integration, right? That's an important part of the puzzle, right? Being able to move data from A to B and maybe do that in a virtual state where you could expose data virtually and integrate data across sources or between application A and application B and do it in a way that is highly virtualized and very, very fast, and maybe even to a certain degree augmented or maybe even automated, maybe. That's important. Kind of the integration piece is important, but it's only one piece of the data management puzzle, right? There's data quality, there's MDM, there's BI, analytics. There's all sorts of other things that you need to do in a data fabric to support a complete kind of 100% data fabric. What's being sold largely today is really just data integration solutions that are bigger, faster, stronger than previous data integration solutions. So beware of vendors that are selling the data fabric, because from Gartner's definition, there's only about 5% of the companies on the entire planet that really even have one. And those that do, custom built it. They didn't go buy it. So that's another thing that Gartner will tell you, is that you can't go buy a data fabric. You can't go and pull a data fabric off the shelf because it doesn't exist as a single product. It is a collection. Today, it exists as a collection of capabilities. Data quality, MDM, integration, BI, data science, database management systems even would fall into that. Your lakes, your warehouses, all those other things, all those things combined. If you are using active metadata and if you have deeply integrated systems where you have data quality tools that are deeply integrated to your metadata management system, you have MDM that is deeply integrated to metadata management, to your active metadata, then you would, in theory, all these things, you would start to get towards what Gartner thinks is a data fabric. But 95% of the companies on the planet are not there today. So that's my riff on the data fabric. There's a lot of promise there, but it's a long way away from prime time. Be careful of fully autonomous or ethical anything. Again, just the idea that we could magically automate data management is a long way away from prime time. The same is true with fully adaptive anything. So Gartner likes to use this word adaptive. And this is particularly relevant in the world of data governance, right? So what adaptive data governance basically says, is that context is the most important thing. And that context should drive your governance decisions. Meaning data quality for a sales and marketing use case is very different than data quality for a finance or a compliance use case. And that's okay. Both of those things can be correct at the same time, right? You don't have to have a single version of a customer record. There can be multiple versions of a customer record, right? Having multiple versions of a customer record, one that is used for a sales marketing use case and another that is used for more of a finance or audit or compliance use case, having those two versions is completely valid. And that aligns to what Gartner would call adaptive governance. Now, the hard part with that is that instead of having one set of business rules, you have two. And not only do you have two sets of business rules, but the context defines when they're used, right? So in the context of a sales and marketing interaction, maybe that's displaying an ad online. Maybe that is sending an offer to somebody through real time as they're interacting with your products on a website, right? That there is some sort of if-then decision being made by an application in real time to say, aha, this is a sales and marketing transaction, so I will use these set of governance rules to define what a customer is and what a customer isn't, versus some other real-time transaction that requires different business rules. As you can see, things here would get very complex very quickly, right? There would be a lot of if-thens that are governing that data, that are governing the rules of how to define something, or what are the quality expectations of that set of data. You've got a customer that is inputting a new record because they are signing up to a loyalty program. Well, that's one set of business rules, but you've got a customer record over somewhere else that's being entered by somebody, maybe in an ERP system. That's a completely different set of business rules, and you would have to manage both in real time. For most companies, just managing one set of business rules is hard enough, let alone maybe hundreds or even thousands that are entirely conditional, right? That are entirely about the context of how that data is being used, or how that data is being consumed, or how that data is even being looked at. The same is true here, even from a BI and analytics perspective, where you could have different definitions or different data being displayed based on use case or based on context or based on user. Really cool stuff. Like, that's awesome, right? Where it's the rules are totally adaptive to a given use case or a given context. But again, holy cow, this is really, really complex. So be wary of anything that says, oh, well, fully adaptive, let's just go implement adaptive data governance. A few things that are, should be worthy of focus right now. MDM, data quality, data integration. What's old is what's new again. These things need attention, and they need attention because chances are pretty good you're focused on a digital transformation. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but if you don't have a plan in place for MDM or data quality or data integration, you are already behind. Cloud optimization, the cloud is now table stakes, right? Everybody's moving into the cloud. Now it becomes an issue of, how do I manage multiple clouds? Or how do I virtualize across clouds? How do I get master data that may be sitting in AWS to interact with master data that may be sitting in Azure, right? These are some of the conversations that are starting to happen. And increasingly companies need to be focused on this. And it's not just an infrastructure and operations a thing. I mean, this is something that data management experts need to be able to get their hands around. Data cataloging, profiling, metadata management. If you think that the data fabric is real, if you think that data will start to inform its own classification, its own use, its own governance, then you need to figure out metadata management. You need to figure it out pretty quickly, right? So if you don't have a data catalog, if you don't have a solution here, if you don't have a discipline around metadata management, well, then you're probably behind the curve. So data fabric, multiple years down the road, but the building block, kind of the step one here, is really the data catalog. Some things I would argue that you should have already had, and that I heard a lot about at the Gartner Summit, but a lot of presentations about these things, a lot of focus, including even in the keynote address on the Tuesday morning of the summit, which is like the kind of the big kickoff that everybody attends, and there's like 4,000 people in a room, which is pretty crazy. Number one, kind of agile. Right. What I heard in the keynote was a lot of focus on what I would loosely just call agile with a capital A, right? And this notion of taking more of an MVP, minimal viable product approach to data management. I like it. I when I was a Gartner analyst, I used to tell people to do that all the time. I would say, hey, strip things down to your absolute most critical priorities, right? Focus on business outcomes, right? Don't focus on domains, focus on business outcomes. And take an agile approach, take an MVP approach. What's the minimum you can do from an MDM and governance perspective to drive value from the business? I was having these conversations 10 years ago, and I know my peers at Gartner were having them 10 years ago as well. So the notion that kind of being agile and taking an MVP approach to decision-making or to data management, it's just not that novel. I mean, we've been saying this for a long time. So I enjoyed the keynote address. I just think that the kind of the insights there were lacking, because these are things that you should already be doing. Data as a product, a lot of focus on data as a product right now, and it's interesting. I would argue that kind of data as a product is something that you should have already been doing. The application of data management principles or product management principles, I should say, that this is kind of like new. I would argue that it's not. You should already have been kind of treating data as a product. You should already have been understanding your user needs. You should have already been doing agile. You should have already been thinking about things like data monetization. And if you weren't doing this, I would argue that you're kind of behind the curve. So I used to be a chief product officer, and the idea of understanding user needs, having ROI, right? Having a business case that is assigned to every product, defining a product based on customer needs or based on challenges or problems that you're trying to solve. This is just how product managers work. This is what they do for a living. And the idea that, oh, well, we've got data and we have data as a product, it's just not revolutionary. Sorry, it's just not. I would argue we should already have been doing this. right? If you're a business analyst, for example, in a data and analytics group, you work for a CDO and you're a business analyst, and you're trying to understand what your customers' reporting needs are. You're trying to build some dashboards. What you would do would look an awful lot like what a product manager would do, right? You would sit down and understand what needs they're trying to solve. You would sit down and understand what some of their core business challenges are, right? You would understand what your constraints are, what you can do, what you can't do, what your limitations are from a technology perspective. You'd understand and build a business case that said, oh, okay, here's how much it's going to take to build this product, and here's the benefit you're going to get from it. These things are what product managers do, and this notion of, oh, well, now we can treat data as a product and become more grown up from the perspective of product management applied to data management. I don't find it that revolutionary. And frankly, it's something I think we should have always been doing. And if we're not, well, then kind of shame on us, because understanding requirements, building business cases, understanding limitations, building products that customers want, and maybe even charging money for them. I mean, this is not revolutionary. Data strategy. Oh, hey, great. Ian from Hitachi, good to see you. So I'm just going through some of the things that I had seen at a recent Gartner Data and Analytics Summit. But Ian, if you've got questions that you want to ask, I can stop my rant about Gartner and dive straight into your questions. We just had some time here between questions, and I was kind of reviewing some of the things that I'd seen at the Gartner event. But if you want to raise your hand, we can pull you on the stage and we can interact directly. Or if you just want to ask your question through the chat, that's fine too. So there were a few other things at Gartner that data strategy, right? Again, this is not novel. This is something that you probably should have already been focused on. There are a few things that weren't covered at the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit that I found really interesting and kind of notable in their absence. One was ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So ESG is kind of at the very least, it was in 2019 and 2020. It was kind of all the buzz in corporate boardrooms about how companies needed to implement ESG programs and needed to make decisions, with more of a focus on ESG. Some of the things that were in the news at the time were a good example of ESG in action was Elon Musk deciding to not take Bitcoin as payment for Tesla cars, right? So there were a lot of pressures on Tesla due to some of the environmental concerns related to Bitcoin, particularly Bitcoin mining and the kind of the compute intensity, around Bitcoin mining, especially given the fact that at the time about 50% of all Bitcoin was being mined in China, where a lot of the power there was coming from coal. So some folks on the environmental side of the house said, hey, Bitcoin is dirty and it is very compute intense, and most of the energy used to create Bitcoin is coming out of China through burned coal. So Elon Musk, maybe you shouldn't take Bitcoin because it's not good on the environment. So that's an example of ESG in action. And Musk said, okay, we won't take Bitcoin anymore. I expected there to be more coverage of ESG at the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit, and there was very little. So I found that interesting. The other thing that I found interesting that they didn't really kind of cover was blockchain. It was actually a top trend in 2019 for Gartner. And since 2019, they haven't talked about it at all, basically, at least through the lens of data and analytics. There are people at Gartner that are focused on blockchain, most certainly. And I interacted with them frequently in my previous role. But through the lens of data and analytics, coverage of blockchain was practically non-existent. I happen to think that blockchain will revolutionize data management. I happen to think ledger technology in particular is a perfect fit for a lot of data management use cases. The easiest one, the lowest hanging fruit here is lineage. And the kind of the immutable nature of ledgers is very good for lineage of data. And if you need, to be able to trace all the way back to when something was created and who touched it, who updated, ledgers are really, really good for that. But that's just one use case. I could literally talk for hours about how I think the blockchain is going to revolutionize data management. I actually have an article that will be published in Forbes magazine in the next 2 weeks that kind of speaks about that. So I'm excited to publish that or I'm excited that that'll be published in the next couple of weeks. And once that happens, that could be a great topic of conversation for future Q&As. So Ian, can you implement blockchain in MDM? Oh, that's a good question. I did want to offer the opportunity for Ian to ask a question. If he had one, go ahead and put it into the chat or raise your hand and we can bring you on stage as well. Garanga, I'm not ignoring your question. I love the question, by the way. I'm just talking so much, I need more coffee. I'm going to lose my voice, which is something that happened at the Gartner event, by the way. I lost my voice by the third day. That tells you how much I was speaking. I did get a chance to speak on a stage as well and do a short presentation, which was a lot of fun. Can we implement blockchain in MDM? Yes, absolutely. So keep in mind that MDM is two things, right? It's software. It's a noun, right? It's stuff you can go buy, including from Profisee. But it's first and foremost a discipline. So could you implement blockchain technologies in support of an MDM program? Yes, absolutely, you could, right? Particularly for certain use cases that seem to be really, really good at enabling shared governance models. So the way that I look at blockchain, particularly distributed ledger technology. So I will use the word blockchain and distributed ledger technology kind of interchangeably, but let's take a blockchain like Bitcoin. For the most part, any of them, frankly. What they are, I would argue, are two things. They are a database. They're a table. Literally, they are a table, a ledger, right? Debits, credits, left side, right side. I mean, ledgers have been around for literally centuries. Right. Since we begin trading things, we've had ledgers of who owns who, what, and who has what. Right. So that's one part of blockchain is a ledger, and the other is a governance layer. Right. So where that governance layer, I would argue, is, for lack of a better phrase, hardwired into the technology. Meaning there are governance rules that exist within blockchains that define things like the validation and verification of transactions. When is there a valid transaction? When is there an invalid transaction? Right? Who has the right to publish to this chain? What are the governance rules related to compensation for validation of transactions? Right. So what is the consensus layer? That's another phrase that is often used in blockchains, which is basically said, when at what point, or how do we manage consensus? Right. So the same happens in corporate boardrooms when we talk about data governance committees. Right. Consensus is reached in a boardroom, in a governance committee, when everybody agrees on the rules of something. Right. The same is absolutely true in blockchain. So you've got governance over on one side. Sorry, my hand keeps fading in and out, but it's there. So you've got governance and you've got a data management technology. Those things together are blockchain. That's what I would argue blockchain is. So could you implement that to support MDM use cases? Absolutely, you could. Nobody is yet. I haven't talked to any single company that is, but if you think about it, governance and data management technology, that actually ends up looking a lot like a data quality tool or even an MDM tool. I hear a lot of people say, well, ledgers aren't good here because they're immutable. Well, because people wrongly associate immutability with not changing. And it's not true. You can change a ledger. You just can't delete entries. So kind of classic relational databases, relational data is CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Ledgers are CRU, create, read, update. There's just no delete, right? So could you support MDM use cases with a database that was create, read, and update, but not delete? Yeah, you could, particularly if your governance model well aligned to that, right? So the short answer to your question, Garanga, is yes, absolutely you could. Is anybody doing that? Am I aware of anybody doing it? No, I'm not aware of anybody doing it. But imagine let's say you were you were supporting a data set that required complete visibility on transactions, that required complete immutability in those transactions, meaning you can update them, but you can never delete them, that required full lineage and visibility of the lineage of that data. To me, the killer use case here, I'm not entirely sure how things work in India, but here in the US and in Canada as well, there are these things called land titles. You own it. What do you buy when you buy a house? You buy a title. You buy a piece of paper. Yes, you buy the house. You get the physical good, but what you're really, from a legal perspective, what you're buying is a piece of paper. It's a deed, and you own the deed to the title of the house. That's really what you're buying. So I would argue that's an NFT. It's in essence an NFT, a non-fungible token. It is a token that represents ownership in a house, right? And that title could be managed on a ledger easily, where the governance rules about when to transfer it, right, could be part of a blockchain. When the governance rules about verification of the players or the people that are involved in a party could be managed in a blockchain. Yes, absolutely. So all the governance can be happening in a blockchain, where land titles or house titles that are there and completely visible. Every transaction would be visible, and updates would be instant, where the governance would be decentralized, managed across all the players within that network. And that could be real estate companies, it could be home builders, it could even be people that are managing those land titles. Today, highly centralized, right? Highly centralized. We're here in the US, it's counties that manage land titles. But where you could decentralize that entirely and have updates to it in real time, instantly, where you could transfer title in literally seconds. To transfer title here in the US right now is a manual process where county clerks are like really looking at signatures, and they're literally still taking scanned images of titles and filing them into image repositories. I mean, it's just so archaic. But could you use MDM type? Could you use that blockchain and combination of MDM and blockchain to manage that type of data, like for land titles or car titles? Same thing. I mean, insurance policies. I mean, the list here is like contracts. Any contract. We could talk about smart contracts. I could talk about that all day long. But could you? Yes, absolutely. You could. You could implement. You could be managing titles as a master data domain with governance that is hardwired into a distributed network, a blockchain network, a decentralized network, where what you would be managing looks an awful lot like an MDM hub, but it would be highly decentralized. So a lot of those business rules are running and managed in a highly decentralized way. So I am really excited about the future of blockchain as it applies to data management. I see a lot of growth in sharing of data as a result. I see things like shared governance. I see shared data quality and data stewardship. I see data being shared across companies and outside of companies where that data sharing doesn't happen today at all. Probably worthy of a completely separate conversation, completely separate venue other than this. But yeah, there's a lot there. You could certainly, I think blockchain is coming to MDM. We're probably a few years down from it, but there's a lot of interesting stuff coming down the pipe, I think. I will have a little more coffee. Haley, did we see anybody else join? Still see Ian, Nandita, and Garanga. Again, guys, feel free to ask a question in the chat or raise your hand and we'll move you on the stage. You don't have to, though. You can just enter, ask a question through the chat. And clearly I will, ask anything. I mean, I just went on a 10-minute rant about blockchain. So I'm not short on opinions, that's for sure. So for those that may be interested, I think I mentioned this earlier. I will have an article publishing in Forbes in a couple of weeks that talks about blockchain. The title of the article is "How Blockchain Will Save Data Governance." Yes, it's a little clickbaity, but I actually think that one of the biggest problems of data governance is a lack of shared incentives, meaning that there are externalities that exist within I will call it loosely a governance network, right? So a large corporation that has data stewards all over the place, I would kind of loosely call that a network, and we can call it a governance network, right? Where there are people in sales and marketing, there are people in finance, there are people in accounting. Everybody's participating in the governance of, let's say, customer data, right? You're responsible for managing customer data and keeping it up to date and on and on. I would argue that governance programs struggle largely because the benefits of governance accrue at higher levels of the organization, right? Like the real benefit, right? Like in terms of selling more or of operating more efficiently or of reducing operational risk, those benefits really accrue to people with pretty big titles, right? If you're a data steward, or if you are a sales manager or an operations manager or a business analyst or somebody else that is doing a day-to-day job related to data management, or just related to whatever you're doing at a company, you're selling things, you're making things, you're distributing things, doesn't matter. If you are an employee, you are probably, and you're, let's just say you're a data steward, or you're in sales operations or revenue operations or whatever, and you're involved in data stewardship. Your job is about making sure that data is correct, right? That takes time. That takes energy. There's effort that is required there. The benefit, the incentive for you to do that, yes, you're going to get a paycheck. That's a nice incentive. But the real incentives are going somewhere else, right? Beyond just paychecks, because we're all going to get our paychecks no matter what, right? Well, hopefully, no matter what. But the real benefits start to accrue at higher levels of the organization. So I think that is, if you ask me again at a cocktail party or out at the pub, why are governance programs failing? And many of them are. I would say because the incentives are misaligned at a high level. That's the pithy answer that I would give, because incentives are misaligned. And I think the way to fix governance and make it more successful is to push the incentives down. And push the incentives at a rank and file level or individual contributor level or a data steward level, where the incentives to getting that data correct can be pushed down. Even to like people like a salesperson that is entering a new record into a CRM system. That's a data stewardship role, right? Where right now for a salesperson, their incentive is to get sales comp to close a deal. Their incentive is not to put the data in correctly. Most salespeople don't care about that because we want them to sell. Right. And they'll say, hey, I'm just selling. I'm not a data steward. I don't know anything about data quality. Right. But if we can push the incentives down, I would say that data stewardship and data governance can improve. And a great way to do that is to pay people, literally pay them when data is correct. So right now I'm using a browser called Brave. I'm not actually using it on my corporate machine, my personal machine right over here. And I literally get paid to browse the web. I get paid in a crypto token. I don't get paid in US dollars, but I get paid something, and there's a value to it. It is the, which token is it on Brave? Oh, the BAT, B-A-T, the basic attention token. So I get paid in BATs. BATs. And they have a value. I mean, I think that the BAT right now is about 20 cents. So every month I make about $4 or $5 just browsing the web. Literally, that's I get paid to browse the web. Can we implement a governance system, maybe even using blockchain, where people get paid to make sure the data is input correctly. I would argue it's pretty easy to do, right? So that's kind of the underlying premise of this article that will be published in Forbes about how blockchain and sure crypto could potentially save data governance. So I think it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting concept. I'm really surprised that more in the data management space, more people are talking about this, because I think that writ large, that there are some revolutionary forces here at play. And it's not just about like paying people to input data correctly. I think that, ultimately what blockchain will do is to allow for the creation of data sharing networks, right? Where these massive ledgers that have lists of people, lists of customers, lists of products, lists of asset, lists of location, doesn't matter, where the governance and stewardship of data for specific shared domains that are shared widely across companies, right? If we share data within a company, we certainly could be sharing data outside a company, because a lot of the data is common, right? It's related to customers, right? Particularly B2B, the customers are all widely known. They're in Google. You can search information about companies on Google, right? So I foresee a world where there are large scale sharing networks that exist across companies that are being managed on blockchains, where the incentives to manage the data and make sure it's correct, where there are actual monetary incentives to make sure data is correct. Today, those incentives exist for senior executives who have accurate reports, or who have reduced their, optimized their supply chain or reduced their business operating risk. But I can foresee a lot of those incentives actually being farther down the food chain later in the future. So that's my thought. 2 blockchain related questions. Garanga, you're asking great questions today. With 8 minutes to go, I do want to kind of offer. I still see Ian on the line. I've seen Andita on the line as well. If you guys have questions as well, please throw them into the chat or raise your hand. We'll make sure that we get them answered in the last 8 minutes. And thank you, Haley, for loading the thing on the bottom of the screen. That's awesome. Connect on LinkedIn. Data literacy. Oh, Ian. Well, thank you. I hope you got some value out of it. I mean, I went on a little bit of a rant about Gartner, and then I spoke a little bit about blockchain. There'll be more there. So glad you could join. We'll do this the last Friday of every month. We're out of turn because of it was the Labor Day holiday here in the U.S. And other countries as well. But Ian, glad you could make it. Data literacy. Oh boy, I don't like the phrase data literacy. I just don't. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll hear me say pretty much the same thing. There's a lot of reasons why. The first one is because the opposite of literacy is illiterate. And as much as I would love to assume that our stakeholders and end users and everybody within our organizations, as much as I would love to assume that people would say, oh, okay, well, data literacy is meant at a higher level, and metaphorically speaking, that means my knowledge on data and how I can leverage data for value and how I can best utilize the reports that are given to me day in and day out. That's what I would like people to think, right? But there are most certainly a subset of people that are saying, well, wait a minute, does he mean that I'm illiterate? I'm not illiterate, right? It's just a loaded term. And it doesn't need to be. That's the thing. It's like in the data and analytics space, in the data management space, we love to make things more complicated by using these big, lofty words that don't need to be used. And in the case of data literacy, you don't need it. There are plenty of other words. You could go with data fluency. I'd be happy with that. But getting back to the thing that I was talking about before about product management, right? Let's assume we were making something. I was making a pair of eyeglasses, right? And I wanted to make sure that people knew how to get value out of those eyeglasses, right? I wanted to make sure that they knew how they fit and proper fit of glasses and the magnification strength of those glasses. Would I embark on a product literacy initiative in order to get people more literate on glasses? No, I wouldn't. I would never use those words because I don't need to use those words, right? I would say I'm going to have end user training, right? I'm going to train my end users, right? As a part of a go-to-market plan, as launching my product, because I'm the product manager of these glasses, I'm going to embark on a campaign to train people about the value of using eyeglasses, about how they can literally transform lives, and how you can fit them correctly, and how you know when the magnification strength of glasses is accurate. I would never use the phrase literacy to describe being eyeglass literate, right? Or vision literate. I'd never do that. It doesn't make any sense. Why do we do this in data management? I don't understand, especially when there are so many other words. I think we do this in the data management space writ large for a few reasons. And there are largely three. One, analysts. I was one. Analysts are selling a product. The product that analysts sell is insight. It's research. It's information. So if you're a Forrester analyst or a Gartner analyst or an IDC analyst or other thought leaders in the space like me, and you're talking about things that really don't change that much. They honestly don't change that much, right? Data management, data governance, some of the technologies evolve, but the core disciplines there really, really don't change that much. But your business depends on recurring subscriptions. Your business depends on bringing new people into the fold. Your business depends on you innovating your product. So if things really don't change that much, like you're selling a toothpaste or toothpicks or cotton swabs, and they don't really change that much, the needs don't change that much, right? Your customers don't change that much. What are you going to do? You're going to add new flashy new words in order to differentiate your product. You're going to call it new things. You're going to invent words to describe things in different ways, but the core function, the core benefit are still going to be the same. Analysts do this all the time. They do it all the time as a means to innovate their product and create demand for their product when really that product hasn't changed very much. We've been saying the same thing about in the MDM space for literally decades about some of the core operating tenets of MDM. So we create words like data literacy to make something new when it's really not, right? So one is analyst. It starts there. When the analysts start using these big lofty words, then the vendors start using them, because the vendors are also looking at ways to differentiate their product and innovate on their product when it's probably really not that different. But hey, there's this new flashy new word, data mesh, right? Or data literacy. You can use this as a data, it's not data discovery. There's a new catchphrase, discoverability. Data discoverability. It's another classic one, right? You go talk to vendors, they'll be like, "Oh, this is brand new. It's complete." And then you peel the onion on what's actually happening and what the technology is there. It's not new. It's not new. There's some minor twists from a data management as a discipline perspective on discoverability and these things, but these things are not new. But the vendors will hold on to what the analysts are saying because the analysts are saying it's new and it's awesome and it's all these things. So then the vendors start saying it's new and oh hey, you clients, customers, buyers, IT buyers, you need to be paying attention to this because it's new and improved, right? And it's flashy and it's something you need to do, something you need. Then the third piece of the puzzle is buyers, IT people like me who go and buy this stuff, who are frankly attracted to shiny objects. We like shiny stuff, right? Everybody likes new stuff, right? I just went and bought a new camera. So I like new shiny stuff. Is it fundamentally different than the last camera that I had? Not really. Don't tell my wife that. But you get my point, right? Like we're attracted to shiny new things and we like to go buy new things. So then we go buy the new thing. We invest in data literacy because we have to do these things, right? So whether it's a discipline or whether it's software, we are attracted to shiny new things. And so those three forces together, I would argue, kind of create the data literacies of the world and the data meshes of the world. We didn't get into data privacy. That was actually real. That's not new, bright and shiny. Data privacy is not. But thanks, Greg. You agree. That's my riff on why we get. Maybe I should build like a flow chart. I think I'm going to do that and put it on LinkedIn. It's like this, the flow chart of why we get attracted to shiny things and why we make these new names for things that don't need new names. So that's my analysis there. So we're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much, Ian. I hope you got some value out of it, and Anita as well. Garanga, always nice to see you. I hope you got some benefit out of this as well. We are going to be publishing these on YouTube. So if anything that you found particularly compelling, you can come back to this content after the fact. We will be doing this every Friday. So or at the last Friday of every month, I should say. Generally, there may be some variations there based on things like holidays and whatnot. I know we're not doing it the last Friday of October or November, I should say, because of the Thanksgiving holiday here in the US. Yeah, thanks. Our next is September 30th. Garaga's keeping me honest here. So if you didn't get a question answered today, if you have new questions between now and then, feel free. We'll see you in another month.